On November 27th, the lawsuit of Wim Hof and his 4 children against the Volkskrant for defamation and slander will be heard, following an article about domestic violence. In this article, his ex-partner Caroline and their son Noah accuse him of serious things. They claim that Wim allegedly physically and psychologically abused them during their relationship. Wim Hof denies these allegations and is therefore going to court. Meanwhile, the mechanism of trial by media is already in full swing. The production of a planned biographical Hollywood film about Hof's life has been halted, and the media internationally uncritically regurgitate the story from the Volkskrant. Today, I speak with Wim Hof about the extremely sensitive issue that has so far been presented unilaterally and, according to the Volkskrant, is not a story with 2 sides, but with 1 side. Wim, welcome to the Black Box studio. Today, we are indeed going to conduct an interview that is complex, as it concerns very sensitive personal matters in your life from the past. A lawsuit is coming up, and I am of course trying to carry out a journalistic exercise correctly here, but at the same time, we also know that we are friends, which makes it complex. That is why I want to do this with the utmost care, with respect for you, but also with respect for all those involved. An article has now been published in the Volkskrant. Now see it here with this headline. On its own, a very nice photo of you in the ice, but of course a painful text on the left side. When you read this article and saw it for the first time, what went through your mind?
Yes. When I read it, I was completely taken aback and utterly surprised by the content of the message that was written in the document. This is what they write. I had received a total of 40 different questions just 1 week prior. So I had a week to ask more detailed questions, and they were very suggestive, insightful, and thought-provoking. How do you view the violence you committed against your wife, your then-wife, at that time? Reflect on the emotional impact and consequences of your actions. I say yes, but who says it is that way? Consider how these actions have affected your life and relationships. It is not only unproven, it absolutely did not happen. Yes, indeed, I was so completely flabbergasted. All those things that I answered in detail, are not included in that article at all, which is quite surprising and disappointing. It is a very one-sided article, lacking any form of balance or fairness in its presentation. And it is indeed approximately 14 years later, which is covering a span of a period from 24 years ago up to 14 years ago. And if it had been that bad, as she has said, why did she wait for a period of 2 whole years after the alleged abuse of her son, an incident of which the Volkskrant did not specify the age of the child involved, before taking any action or making any public statements about the situation? He was 18. That was an adult who was trained in elite sports.
That is about Christian.
That is indeed about Christian, in fact.
That is not your son, but it is your son.
I held on to him because he formed a path as a son in our relationship, which was significant and meaningful to me. And based on that, it made me have to leave the house, a decision that was incredibly difficult and painful, which I did not want at all. I loved that woman deeply and sincerely, and I just wanted to stay there. I just wanted to be there. My son, my boy, whom I have with her. Yes, I only loved him.
Then you are talking about Noah.
About Noah, yes.
That is a child you have with Caroline, and Caroline is the woman.
It has been a long time, and I have not seen her for 14 years. I have missed her dearly, and often think about her, based on the many stories from her. One-sided in a biased manner in favor of the child. What is it called, or what is commonly referred to as child protection? Those are all indeed one-sided stories, but that is then taken as if it is all evidence. And I actually had Christian on the night I really had to leave the house.
Just for the viewer who may not completely understand the case, it is simply about your ex-girlfriend Caroline, with whom you have a child, Noah, who is now 21 years old. They have therefore stated in the Volkskrant, now 22, they have stated about that domestic violence, Caroline. That's Caroline. Yes, Caroline. She already had 2 children, Christian and Natalie. Yes. And you indeed already had 4 children yourself. And with those 4 children, you also started living together in this blended family. It seems to me extremely complex.
But it was, as it was.
Yes, I'm trying to write a bit of context, because I think that was also in the podcast of Peter Klok, the editor-in-chief of the Volkskrant, from which we will listen to a piece shortly. He had a conversation with the authors of the article for which you are also going to file a lawsuit against Anneke Stoffelen and Robert van der Griend, who published this article in September about this domestic violence. They also indicate that they realize this issue is very difficult because it involves a relational context in which you never really know how things went. At the same time, they say this. Let's listen to this, as this is an important segment in which they actually say that there is a story that has only one side and not 2 sides, and that has been the reason for me to do this interview, because I also want to hear your side today. Let's hear how Robert van der Griend, one of the co-authors of the article, talks about this to Peter Klok.
What I think is very important here is that it would really have been a serious mistake to pretend that this is a story with 2 sides. It may be like that in general, but in this case, it really isn't. What is very important, I think, is that all the claims made in our piece are fully substantiated, with evidence and multiple testimonies, and the claims that have come out so far are questionable. That's not possible either, because in the case of the children, they didn't experience it at all. They lived with Caroline Hak for a few months, but only after the violence started. Then they said, "Take the house apart," and Noah was born. Furthermore, I think it's important to know that all the children are somehow connected to Hof. All the children from the first group? Yes, so they are somehow involved. They also now have a business interest in defending their father. And finally, and this may be a sore point, they themselves are also victims of Hof.
We asked Hof's children a few questions 2 weeks ago. They have let us know through a lawyer that they do not wish to be involved in this story and do not want to be associated with the accusations against their father.
Yes, a story that has no 2 sides but 1 side, in which the authors of the article also insinuate that your previous children, the 4 who were already there, are actually defending you now because they would have a business interest. That is, of course, quite a strong insinuation that cannot be substantiated. How do you listen to this statement? Because how can a story have only 1 side?
Yes, well, God, you know, I heard it, and indeed I am, as you might expect, of course, the one it is all about. Now I live with my wife and with a happy new family in the beautiful city we call home.
You have become a father again.
I have just become a father, once again, and I am very happy in Australia. Because she is Australian and we have lived here in the Netherlands for 8 years. And in the summer, in August, we moved. I received a permanent residency visa. Yes, indeed, I now live in Australia. But then I suddenly heard it all there. And when I hear this again, yes, in the beginning it definitely affected you. Absolutely. So 14 years later, but let's go back 14 years ago. When I actually had to end it, I had no money. And then I, in fact, somewhat had a reputation as an eccentric.
What do you mean, had to leave the house?
At Caroline's, at that time, that was the evening she told me I had to leave the house. That evening she told me I had to leave the house. And I didn't want to leave the house at all. I loved that woman. I am simply the father of my child. But the shaping of Christian and Natalie had taken its form. And in the meantime, had been in Poland, where she had a foundation with a house. And there I paid rent for, where she had me laboring. for her foundation for a total of 7 years, and always made me work for nothing. For that, I had to pay in order to be allowed to successfully conduct workshops there. That's how it was. And that evening, I returned from Poland with a little bike for Noah. I had taken my son with me, and then I was told that I had to leave the house. Yes, it's logical that a disagreement arises from that. And I said then, Christian, honestly, tell the truth. Christian really told the truth, but he actually didn't want to, and I held him back. And that is the exact moment when she saw, hey, I can use that at that point. Very manipulative woman, unfortunately, but I loved her. At that very moment, the police were promptly called to the scene, and I was unfortunately evicted from the house with a staggering 30,000 euros in tax debt looming over me, because I always just transferred all of my money to her without hesitation or second thought. And yes, that's exactly how the unfortunate situation unfolded. The reason it is different now is that I got up 1 month later after being evicted from the house by the police because of that, which is actually a struggle. With a fully trained 18-year-old man who is just training hard at a high level in skating, yes, then you are strong. So there was really nothing, but it suited them very well. And there, at that moment, I just also left the house. And yes, we actually maintained a normal relationship for another 2 years. And then, gradually, I was, in fact, worked out. And in the meantime, she got involved with child protection and so on. But that was when I just live happily ever after and continue to do so. I have once again gone from depression because I loved her. I really suffered from that. After that particular relationship, truly had to absolutely get out of there. And at a certain point, the spark went out. Apparently, from her side, not from my side, I suffered from that. And unfortunately, indeed, I have not been allowed to see my son for 14 years, based on a compelling and intricate story that she unilaterally submitted to the relevant Child Protection Services authorities. And now, I know what that is called. It is called parental alienation. Parental alienation, that is when her mother in her life never told her who her father was. She has never known her father. And she was told that her father was unexpectedly and tragically dead throughout her entire existence. When she was 15, she unexpectedly heard from her best friend that her beloved father had tragically and suddenly died, and that he had certainly suffered a lot from not being able to see his own daughter. If you are raised like that, if you have grown up in such a kind of environment, and therefore you will believe in the stories that are projected onto you. She said later, let my son not seeing me based on stories that are not true, that are a side of reality or the truth, that are fabricated and he now thinks could be the truth, and he is not aware of it, which is misleading and confusing to him as he tries to understand the situation and make sense of it. He is a performance artist. I speak so much English, dancing ballet, and then you have to perform at a high level, such as you are talking about Noah now, about Noah, because they are still accusing me of PTSD towards my son after 14 years. While I have been prevented from seeing my son, I have always just played along. How manipulative that is. Anyway, I am now also being accused of PTSD.
Yes, Noah would have PTSD from you.
Yes, from me. I said, how can that be? I said, guys, I haven't seen him for 14 years. I have only ever really played with him in my life. It's the Indian stories and experiences that have been projected onto him over time from someone who has been in an old rejection syndrome, and that is called parental alienation syndrome. That is slowly starting to seep through as a syndrome, as a condition that has never been known in child protection.
What I find so interesting, Wim, is that we are actually talking about an extremely complex private matter. I have also experienced things in my personal experience in my life where if you don't know the context, you can quickly blow it up into something that seems terrible, while often much more information is needed to understand how things come about. That is why I actually find it quite inappropriate for the Volkskrant to write such an article, because it concerns private matters where you really need to have everything thoroughly mapped out and also fully understand the situation. I find it fascinating that you yourself now give such a description of what might be happening with Caroline based on her past, how you explain what is happening with Noah. While in the Volkskrant podcast, Peter Klok and the two journalists actually sketch a kind of clinical pathological profile of you, as if you were some kind of strange and unusual man with a sort of megalomania, with delusions of grandeur, manifesting in a very unpleasant and comprehensive way in that family.
Yes, even talk about femicide, about the murder of women.
Yes, and then there is talk about Olaya, your...
Yes, she is also included. It is completely made up.
Yes, because Olaya is your former wife with whom you have 4 children, and she committed suicide. That is quite an important detail. To begin with, my condolences. It is a terrible experience to go through that your wife commits suicide with whom you have 4 children. Let's go back. Time to have a better understanding of what has happened to you in your life and where you come from. Your wife, Olaya, commits suicide as you have 4 children with this woman.
That must certainly be Yes, that is an unexpected and unforeseen psychological impact on your normal and significant life. You just can't understand that. You have to process it, and that takes a lot of time. And my children too. They have lost a mother, a guiding light in their lives, a source of wisdom and comfort. During her life, she was not only a mother, but also a mentor and friend to many. For example, to add some nuance, I often warned her about her behavior, which was sometimes unpredictable. I could not deny that she was indeed suffering from schizophrenia. Unfortunately, I discovered this fact only after it was too late through multiple psychiatric missions because the situation had escalated beyond control. In the later years, he also went back to her parental home in Spain for extended periods of time, for several months on end, and they returned there again. In the meantime, I had to support the 4 children and simply raise them, take them to school, make food, and so on, like that. We all suffered from that pressure as well, and we all felt it deeply and profoundly, each and every one of us. Despite the challenges we faced, we managed to discover a method that allowed us to, indeed with a significant advantage.
How do you tell 4 children that mom committed suicide?
Well, she had been going through a period of depression and emotional distress for a considerable number of years. And she was then not with us for long periods. So she actually never functioned in any meaningful capacity within the family, especially in the last 5 years. And she always had the choice to return, yes or no, indeed, absolutely. And she just couldn't do it. And that is a mental disorder, a mental inability to be there. And I just had to be there. So someone had to function, and that was me. Well, I just did that. And I am currently working with those same children in my professional capacity. We have a global company. We are doing very well, and I am pleased to share that. My daughters have different master's degrees, each in their own unique field of study. They left that and now only work with me. which has been a wonderful experience for all of us. And in that I say, honestly speaking, I do not like people who follow. You need to start developing yourself in various aspects of your life, but we know how to cope from having nothing and then just from our own strength, and we have experienced the journey of starting from scratch. To develop yourself and grow, in any case, to stand in life and thrive. And that was when, indeed, at that particular moment, it was simply demanded without hesitation. Because if you don't have your mother and she is gone for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, and then sometimes she is there again and then not, then that is already one. They were completely, in fact, actually, with me, alone in the family. It's as if that was, in a way, a single parent, one adult family structure, and that worked in society. And that indeed actually functioned effectively. Very well. Till I met Caroline 6 years after her death. And yes, indeed, I am simply, truly, just a man, and I felt genuinely, deeply attracted. And she was completely open to it. She actually brought me in instead of the other way around. Yes, we started a relationship, and my children found it hard to accept because they were raised in a different way of life. And they were doing well, They attended high school and gymnasium, and it just went well. And they were certainly in HAVO, and that actually went well, as expected. Because I ended up in her world. And yes, I don't know how manipulation, etc., works. I only know that a woman is a woman and a man is a man. Forces of attraction in your image with each other. And I said, as I recall, the young ones initially approached us first. But it seems that they, over time, apparently slowly could not identify with her lifestyle and her way of managing a family in any significant way. And she left. And I was actually really, truly stuck. I was stuck there in a very complicated relationship worm. I am not a victim, not at all. But certainly at one point, I no longer saw my children. And we had a beautiful child together. At one point in time, she had a wonderful foundation established to take in children who would end up coming from various orphanages. It was affectionately called Time Out. And we had a house in Poland. For 15,000 euros, you could buy a house there. An old smithy. Well, it needed a lot of hard work. I was constantly doing that. I wrote everything down. And for 7 years, I worked really hard there for basically nothing. Because in the end, I was worked out. I wasn't actually even included in that foundation indeed. But, in that I tried to form my own initiatives as Iceman. I also came into contact with Discovery Channel, National Geographic, Guinness World Records. But she actually, in fact, really wanted to drain that, stop it, and indeed only have me truly for her foundation. Those children of hers, indeed, from her first marriage, actually formed a pathway between me and her at a certain point, in fact. And that, she became, incredibly stronger, and I didn't earn that much money. Significantly. Yes. Occasionally with television recordings, I would get 6,000 or 7,000 euros again. And then, yes, in that way, I somehow tried to earn money. And that, my name just gradually grew. But all of the income, whatsoever I earned, went to her. And she handled the finances every single time. Ultimately, that psyche, that psychological path of her ex, who is actually also a victim of the same circumstances because their father, I am not their father, she had left. This complex situation, involving emotional and psychological factors, has deeply affected everyone involved. And now came the renewal. And I tried what I could to serve. But yes, That didn't work. It worked, and apparently that didn't work exactly, and that grew stronger like a path. Those children grew bigger. At a certain point, 18 years old, very well trained. They have a deep-seated and profound inner anger that they have lost their father in their hearts, so to speak, as it were, and they work their way inward in a certain way. And I wanted to bring that truth to light. At the moment, she said I had to leave the house because they had long been conspiring to get me out. That is simply a deeper, vengeful thought. Anyway, that resulted in a bit of a confrontation between me and Christian, because I wanted to know the truth, but of course that doesn't come out in order to... And that was used as a direct and immediate result as a police order to immediately throw me out now. And now, they finally had complaint, an aggression, a crime. I worked 40 hours for that, paid 350 euros. I then gave him another 2,000 euros. That Christian, because he needed a computer. I wrote a letter to express my sincere apologies, and that's not how it is. I apologize for any inconvenience caused. This is a sense of powerlessness and inevitable force majeure circumstances, and that's how it happened, right? But he got. They had absolutely no intention whatsoever of bringing each other back together. Or did they have any desire or inclination to be with one another in? They didn't want that at all. But it had been that way from the very beginning. Anyway, 2 years after that whole thing, after that eviction, it was a significant event in our lives, and it marked a turning point for us. We really separated physically, and, as it now states in the Volkskrant, the article elaborates on the situation, suggesting that the alleged incidents of abuse and violence which are mentioned are not supported by any concrete evidence or proof. That's one. Two is, when it is connected in any way to that ongoing struggle of mine and Christian, who is just an adult, who is not portrayed with age by the Volkskrant, as if I were in any way abusing those children. It is therefore completely fabricated in any way whatsoever. And then, my own brother, who has been a very successful, highly acclaimed and renowned documentary filmmaker. He has made over 200 documentaries, winning awards abroad, or at some point, I don't know, tax-wise, was being a little creative with grant applications. And by the same Volkskrant, as reported by the newspaper, it has been completely and utterly destroyed beyond recognition. They are now using that man, who was once a trusted individual and a close confidant, to create a completely fabricated and utterly false story against me in a report he made because he couldn't get any financial assistance or money from me after he has fallen on hard times and has no financial resources left.
He has also testified against you in this room.
Yes, here and also in America. In America, there was writing about me regarding those drownings, again by the Volkskrant. They were also present as witnesses, extremely biased.
In California sat Anneke Stoffelen, who was also a witness.
Yes, that is the journalist who wrote this article.
And Rob Hof, who also partly there. It's just one click that has been going on for years, and now the leak is out. We see that we also have a complaint now, etc. It's all coming. They will pay for that. For a considerable amount of time, these dedicated individuals have tirelessly devoted their efforts to crafting and developing articles that unfortunately rely on stories that are not based on factual information, and we can clearly and effectively demonstrate that now with a detailed example. We have a very well-structured, highly motivated, subtly yet strongly motivated, exceptionally good and robustly strong complaint. I have shown that to journalists, and they say, yes, you are turning that Volkskrant into complete pulp.
Is there then nothing true about that article from the Volkskrant? Or do you say, well, it's a bit true, or how do you see it?
Well, it is an absolutely, entirely and completely one-sided story, and there is a lot of hate, frustration, and negativity woven through it. Which type of relationship, whether it be friendship, romantic, or familial, has absolutely no disagreements whatsoever? Which relationship, after a long period of 10 years, has a comprehensive list of situations that are greatly exaggerated beyond their original context? Then you can write anything about everything. This has nothing to do with that. It is indeed very important to note that this is about character assassination in this particular situation. The Volkskrant, a well-known Dutch newspaper, just wants to move on to the next big story, which involves bringing down someone who has become very successful in their field. This individual has gained fame and recognition far beyond the Dutch borders, becoming a prominent figure internationally.
Why do you think the Volkskrant would start such a witch hunt exactly against you?
That's just obviously clickbait and scoring. And it is hatred from people. That is not journalism. It is deeply driven by motives of frustration and hate. That Anneke van Stoffelen, she is a hateful person. To ask such suggestive and leading questions, which probe deeply into the matter at hand, and to misuse her journalistic power, by quoting individuals who are completely irrelevant to the situation, is highly unprofessional and unethical. Knowing that it is completely irrelevant and then writing it down as if it is a structured story with psychologists, psychiatrists, professors, doctors, all telling a story about a pattern they have detected based on Frankenstein arguments or things that are not true at all in a detailed manner with extensive elaboration and comprehensive analysis by various experts in the field, including but not limited to.
Yes, because you indeed hear that in the podcast, of which I will include the link from the Volkskrant itself. Peter Klok interviews the journalists Anneke Stoffelen and Robert van der Griend. They indeed talk about a kind of psychological, clinical, pathological pattern surrounding you. What I find remarkable is that it's as if they are somewhat taking the seat of therapists to create a character sketch of you from which it should appear that Caroline's statements are correct, while that actually has very little to do with journalism. Because then you purely ask yourself what the actual facts are and not so much to psychologize whether this man is right or not. And I do indeed see that happening in that podcast.
That is called character assassination. So they must first be able to establish their character before they can proceed to character assassination. Character in the media. A character in the world in this captivating story. And then the Volkskrant has something to write about.
Yes, because you are also indeed compared in that podcast to Michael Jackson and various other greats who at some point suffered from megalomania. Those are indeed very remarkable.
Those are, in fact, statements from my brother, who himself has been a highly successful documentary maker in the field of filmmaking and who, at some point, became megalomaniac. At some point, he indeed cheated on his own family and evaded taxes and was all proud of that. That is megalomania. In other words, being driven by the power you suddenly and perhaps unexpectedly acquire, then you develop heirs. And accordingly, in a manner that is ultimately, or behavior will ultimately change.
You're sitting here again comfortably and just relaxed in a t-shirt with boxer shorts and bare legs. I have absolutely never ever seen you brag about your salary or even your position in the world in any way in your life. In my view, you truly come across as someone who is genuinely humble and possesses an open-hearted nature. Your ability to, of course, you are very enthusiastic about your work and driven, but I find that very inspiring. However, I cannot catch you in megalomania. So, where would this story come from?
This comes from Rob Hof, who is indeed suffering from it and is certainly paranoid now. He is still continuously fighting against numerous companies and persistently against KRO and NCRV, that they have brought him down, and he is filing all sorts of legal actions and lawsuits against them in various courts, believing he is completely right. That is megalomania, delusions of grandeur. But it is the same person who is known for his honesty and reliability who told all this to Anneke Stoffelen and whom Anneke Stoffelen eagerly accepts because Rob Hof is my older brother and has always been a source of truth, he must know, no, she truly and completely does not see the megalomania of Rob Hof at all in any way. She does not see the parental alienation syndrome of Caroline Hak, and she does not see her own hatred. They do not see that it's a clique. They have indeed been at it for years. Anneke Stoffelen, also earlier with Scott Carney, an investigative journalist in Denver who talks about various drownings and Wim Hof method. Breathing, and we had a lawsuit about that. And the same investigative journalist and Anneke Stoffelen, who is also involved, and Rob Hof, who is also involved, have nothing to do with the Volkskrant regarding this case. But because they lost that case, after 9,500 pages, the judge very motivatedly states, mentioning Scott Carney, the investigative journalist, that it is hearsay, that it is conjecture, unfounded speculation. And with that, everything that the investigative journalist has said about me is dismissed as the prime witness, the most important key witness. And in the meantime, they were simultaneously working on this new situation, probably also looking at the case in California to see if they could use that to completely undermine us, which has completely and utterly failed because it has all been speculation and absolutely without a shred of evidence carried out over the course of a year and a half by a lawyer who was, in fact, the biological father of a child for whom he himself showed no sense of responsibility. And that has all been proven, and his ex-wife also stated that openly and plainly, but they do not take that into account. They have hate. This is not independent journalism that they practice. This is hate and frustration behind it. And she most likely has a screw loose in her mind herself, somewhere from her youth or genetically, in some way. Whatever the case, it doesn't matter. I am currently working on a complaint in order to clearly show, based on factuality, that this whole thing is a completely fabricated story based on fabrications, invented stories, and absolutely invented reports. And undeniably, no evidence.
On November 27, there is a case in court where you are like challenging the Volkskrant. Yes. Then you have a defense. Did you also receive a right to reply from the Volkskrant to...
No, from the Volkskrant I received a total of 40 questions 1 week in advance. Before the publication, was there, while they had conducted research for a year, it is simply and entirely a fabricated story without any basis in reality. And of all the 40 questions I have answered, which they asked in various situations and circumstances, in different scenarios, almost nothing has been seen again in the Volkskrant. Nothing has been printed at all.
You have answered 40 questions, yes, in detail, and hardly anything from that has been spread in the article.
Barely. Only that I must emphasize that I deny absolutely and completely. I have justified everything in any way whatsoever, and none of it has been included.
And it is even said in the podcast, this is not a story with two sides. This is a story with one side. That makes it completely bizarre, right?
Yes, and that it is indeed said like that, as it is, so pontifically, so explicitly. Then you think, guys, you are journalists, as responsible journalists who have a duty to report the truth. You can't just talk from one side, considering all sides of a story, and spend a year on it, ensuring balanced reporting. Then, after all that time, you give only 1 week to briefly produce what I have said there as a response, dedicating equal time to responses, where actually nothing has remained. That word also is included in the accusation. Look, they have consciously done this to us. It is a Dutch newspaper, and then they are going to publish it internationally. Something that would have happened in a typical household environment approximately 15 years ago without evidence. Yes. Then, that has nothing to do with it. That has to do with intentionally, with purpose, wanting to destroy this brand, this company, and this mission and reputation. People are very much aware of this situation. I also wrote an in-depth article with the Daily Mail about this particular issue, and the response to it was quite significant. Furthermore, I had a detailed discussion about it with my children. And then they also saw with Luke Campbell, who is someone from the BBC, with whom I made a major documentary at the time, with Caroline. And he undoubtedly experienced us for weeks. And he also said, yes, this woman is not a victim. This woman is a very strong person. And she stands very clearly and undoubtedly strongly in her beliefs against this man. And that is not a weak person as he just presents himself there. And we have all the evidence. Here, you have the footage. Well, all that footage exists. And it also shows that she was already involved with me then. The Iceman was not allowed to be. She really wanted me to stop that. She tried absolutely everything to make me stop being the Iceman. But yes, indeed, that never happened. In any case, because I truly and deeply loved that woman, that such intense hatred, such frustration, and then she actually made a mistake, because after that, a month later, after our separation, my popularity skyrocketed, because I showed at the Radboud Hospital that I am not just talking, but that I provide proof. And that I showed for the first time, me as a person, 80 minutes in the ice, blood being drawn. And that blood turned out to be resistant to an E. E. coli bacteria. That Iceman, that mission, Caroline wanted to take down those whole 10 years because I was infatuated with her.
Why do you think Caroline didn't exactly want you to mature as the Iceman with your philosophy?
Because people who often suffer from a syndrome, unfortunately, want to use others in order to manipulate and control them. They cannot serve people, other people must serve them, because they do not have that energy or capability to do so. This is due to their inherent limitations and lack of resources. They do not have the energy to develop themselves, because they themselves suffer from a syndrome. And then you are not connected to your own energy, to your own being. Then you have to tap into others. You make use of others, just like narcissists. They make use of others. They have a screw loose. They are not feeling well. And essentially the way they draw energy is by controlling and manipulating others. The old rejection syndrome is the same. My son, indeed tells things that he is indeed suffering from various things of mine, while I am just his father. And at 14 years old, yes, he suffers from that. That this is not recognized by child protection is unfortunately simply the significant shortcoming of the entire institutionalized child protection system. It is more of a mark block. There is money involved.
Do you have contact with your other 4 children?
No.
Aren't they his half-brothers and sisters?
Yes, exactly. They have all been withheld. It has all been very one-sided, how this has gone. And he has just been brainwashed. But I love that woman and I love my son. In any case, as a father, I am just open about it. He is 22 now. Behind you, it has been 7 November years. And so, yes, I think he needs me. Because parental alienation syndrome is also simply passed on. As a result, you later have problems in your own relationships. Because your own relationship with your parents has not been good. Anyway, coming back to it, I definitely want to have my son. Everything is born out of love. Why can't you just talk, I say? Then they will spend years concocting how to put together a fabricated story with all lies and fabrications. And then I have to step into court because I have been attacked for 2 years now. And now, the leak is out. That is the public ground. That is certainly Anneke Stoffelen, and she is an investigative journalist in America whom I have always helped. He came to me approximately 10 years ago, or perhaps 11 years ago, in Poland, and he would write about me as a spiritual guide, a charlatan. That is what he would write about as an investigative journalist. And then he saw that what I did was actually the opposite, that it all works, that he suddenly was free from his own autoimmune condition, that he suddenly became much stronger and was better in the saddle and so on. And then he started to come with me, to follow me. He went with me to climb Kilimanjaro. Through me and my input, he was able to sell a New York Times bestseller, but then he didn't want to anymore. He wanted to open the whole business. He thought he knew better. But then we said, okay, well, stop. You don't respect us. And then that suddenly stopped. And that indeed created a deep sense of hatred, a frustration in him, because his next books based on that, The Wedges Away, certainly flopped. When he wrote about me, his entire body of work, he remarkably got a New York Times bestseller for the first time in his life. It certainly went to his head, and he very much thought he knew better. That same investigative journalist became extremely frustrated because my son no longer wanted to work with him. Also because he became disrespectful in his next book about me. And then we said, yes, I won't write the foreword for this book either. Isn't that logical? Can't you see that? No, not everyone wants it that way. And that's how people get things in their heads. And then, many years later, he comes to say that I can indeed actually be held truly responsible for the drownings of people who are going to do the breathing exercises in a swimming pool. Say, yes, sorry guys, I am cold water. Cold water discipline. And you do breathing exercises in bed, not in a swimming pool to go swimming underwater. I have done that in the past, Discovery Channel and so on. But that is not the Wim Hof method. Wim Hof method is described very clearly. You should not do it at all in a swimming pool, not in a car, or where you need to remain physically and mentally present. So you must maintain control over yourself. Do not do that in such a situation at all. It is all written down very clearly. Very good warnings, and that is then disregarded. Yes, you also shouldn't play with a soccer ball on the highway, or perhaps running with a wheel against oncoming traffic on a mountain, thinking you can just use the whole road, and then maybe, possibly, blaming the car manufacturers because they brought those things into the world.
Yes, but you won that case.
Yes. It turned out to be completely fabricated. Speculation. Not a shred of evidence. It has been proven. After 9,500 pages, legal material, then you know that you have investigated something additional, information. Then, as you might already be aware, you are aware that those judges have reviewed it thoroughly 4 times. And they then tell speculation, unfounded, and baseless. It's just a web of all sorts of bizarre and strange things put together and sold as truth, as fact. But there is absolutely nothing. And Anneke Stoffelen was involved in that. Rob Hoff was involved. And Scott Carney, the investigative journalist, was involved. He told and he knew. He made a whole series of videos about me on YouTube, the internet. He's just a YouTuber with a lot of stories, fabricated and all, that has already been debunked by various sources. As an investigative journalist, yes, sensational stories. He is a sensational person. But scientifically and indeed in terms of journalistic integrity, he was my friend. I gave him everything. He has shown a complete lack of respect towards me, utterly disregarding my feelings and taking advantage of my unwavering loyalty. His actions have left me feeling deeply hurt and disappointed.
It must hurt, right?
Yes, I do, absolutely. And what Caroline Hak has truly done, that's indeed something too. I loved that woman. And then they bring you down like that. Why, guys? Why not sit at the table? Share success. Be nice to each other. Those are real problems.
Now, there are also your 4 children that you had with your sadly deceased wife, Olaja, who committed suicide. And those 4 children have actually stated that the statements from Caroline and Noah can still affect them. Laura says, "I don't think there is a man on earth who is purer than my father." She calls Wim a man of words, a man who always tries to help others. "One thing I do know is that my father had a mission that no one believed in when he started," Laura continues. "He was often told that he was crazy, but science proved that he was right. This was not because he was full of doubts, but because he was full of conviction." That's a nice statement from Laura. It is stated in Peter Clock's podcast that these 4 children would also be victims.
They all said, everything is untrue from our side, but everything is true from their side. And my children are, of course, definitely biased because they are in a business with me. Because we, as a team, together, after I left Caroline, pulled something out of the ground together and with great effort. Would they now be biased? What is it called? Partisan? Would they be partisan? Yes. But you can always turn everything around like that. And they also do not listen to my other ex-girlfriends. They did not listen to them either. Not to my other brothers. They did not listen to them either. Because they tell an entirely and utterly different story. In fact, it is only Caroline Hak and Rob Hof, both with a certain mental state. That is indeed not right, on which this story is based. And in that, I just simply see people like Anneke Stoffelen and that Griend and that clock. That people have engaged in a bit of inexpensive sensational journalism and thought they could score here. Because ultimately a newspaper is also just work and you have to score. How can you score better than Wim Hof, the best man in the world, to bring him down while you are a Dutch newspaper? With what kind of interest? And how that has been fabricated shows what I am dealing with. And that has been for 2 years now. But now I am coming out. Now I see the leak.
Peter Clock looks forward to the trial on November 27th with confidence. He says, because you are actually only disputing a small part of the article. How do you view that case?
He says it is a small piece. Oh, that is what allowed you to suddenly detect a pattern which brought in psychiatrists, doctors, psychologists, and professors to clearly and thoroughly substantiate your expressions as you describe them in detail. So that will then become void. After that, we move on to the next step. The next step is, it is first smart and difficult by using people you know are lying, whom you have been warned about, proven with facts, and yet using them to establish a certain pattern. That will therefore become void. After that, we move on to smart and luster for our brand, our company. Simply demonstrate the malice, wickedness. That is one. And then you simply get the next steps. After that, you get the damage judges, the damage assessors. They will then look at what has been caused here, namely a film for which 10 million has already been raised. Well, you can't do that. By knowingly and intentionally causing damage that you know is based on fabrications, and deliberately. And then ensuring that a film has to be publicly stopped in order to achieve its goal, and that has already brought in 10 million. That is considerable financial damage. Then you have books that I have written in the meantime, which are now ready for publication. They have already cost $750,000 to $800,000 in advances alone. And then such a whole promotional campaign. Indeed, there are indeed millions behind it. And then after that, I will proceed to discuss Caroline in more detail. She has no money. Caroline has no money, and my son certainly doesn't. He still has to start and is experiencing damage. He is experiencing psychological damage because of all this. I want to help him. That is what I want. Caroline just needs to talk to me. Because I have always truly and deeply loved her, have indeed suffered deeply and tremendously because of that. But I will also demonstrate in detail how parental alienation syndrome works. In other words, parental alienation, and that she is currently committing violence against her son. That my son is also my responsibility. And I see that now. And I will indeed demonstrate that very well. I'm absolutely simply trying to reach her in a humane way. Listen, love born will always remain. But let frustration and hatred have taken their toll. Look further. Look further, because she has used my immense strength and unwavering power in her time for her foundation to be solely for that and to be harnessed for her cause, which I have always done with all love, unwavering support, and conviction. And the way she knows me, that is heartless. Then tell her to try to discover feelings, also for yourself. Because you were not only a beautiful woman on the outside, but inside you were deeply disturbed with a complex and intriguing personality, and she knows that. She is fully aware of this and can keep that hidden from the outside world. And to set up a one-sided story, blown out of proportion, in a way that is using a newspaper that has been consistently waging a campaign against me for years. But inside, I am just there. And I will always remain. That is what I do, and it is within me, and that is what drives me. That is my mission, and I am going much further. I have just begun. And you, Mr. Volkskrant or Miss Volkskrant, and Caroline Hak and Rob Hof, yes, sorry guys, you tried, but it has actually only worked positively for me. It has positively affected my psyche, which sees itself further cleansed and more respected in the world as an authority in the field of love. In the area of relieving people of their burdens, traumas, conditions, and emotional depressions, bringing them back to the here and now in the light of being. That is where I am. That is what I do. I just keep it simple. I am not Jesus. I am not your sister. I am here. I am Wim Hof, who believes in something. And that belief is indeed stronger than the systematic oppression we are in within this system.
Wim, I think it's beautiful that you are so combative, but I actually find it even more beautiful that you speak so lovingly about Caroline and Noah at the end, and that you still extend a hand to them. I think that is a very beautiful side of you that we have been able to see today. And I hope that through this interview you may have been able to look at Wim in a more nuanced way. For me, it was a beautiful experience, Wim, because we often talked in a very motivational way about various things, and for the first time, I was able to look a bit more into your soul, and I see a beautiful soul. And I think it is important that you all see that too. A lot has been written about Wim. Be sure to read it all. And with the knowledge you have now, you can also see how to place those kinds of articles. This was the story that was missing, and I think now we have a nice, complete picture of this entire case. On November 27, you will go to court and we will see what the verdict will be. I want to thank you for watching. Share this video with as many people as possible. And if you can spare a donation to support our work, it is of course very welcome, because we are doing it ourselves. Self-reliance is very important, right, Wim?
Yes, absolutely wonderful. Personal strength and indeed personal faith. And that naturally rests in the goodness that we are.
Thank you, Wim Hof. Thank you all for watching.